The next group of skills that we're going to be discussing and demonstrating are going to be basic ties and setups. The goal here is to be able to control and move your opponent to a more favorable position to attack. We're going to be going over pummeling and the clinch in a separate DVD. But for now, I'm going to go over 14 different basic type of attacks. This is not all of the possible setups one can use, but it's a fair range to get you started. The first setup we're going to do is one of the most basic and one of the most fundamental and probably one of the first ones wrestlers learn, and that's a basic forehead tap. Now, this is a good one to start out with to learn, and it's adaptable to no-holds-barred mixed martial arts, which I'll discuss in a moment. But reality is that against your most experienced wrestler types, this isn't going to be real effective. The premise of this type of setup is that I distract my opponent by tapping him on the forehead, and that may make him blink or may distract him for a moment, and that gives me time to initiate my formal attack. As you can imagine, for example, with a good boxer, they're not going to be distracted too much by simple jabs at them if they're experienced. They're going to keep their eyes open. They're going to be able to respond to that type of preparation from their opponent to deliver another attack. And that's pretty much the same with the forehead tap with a wrestler. However, it is a fundamental type setup, and so we're going to go over this first, and then I'll discuss how it might be modified in a different situation. The main thing I want to emphasize with this setup, as well as with a number of other setups, is that when you do the setup, one, the setup is a preparation for the formal part of the attack in the sense that it's really a continuation. In other words, you shouldn't think of separating the setup from the attack. When you've chosen to initiate the setup, the attack should follow pretty much consistently. You would rarely initiate a setup, evaluate how your partner or opponent responded to that setup, and then attack. You need to have confidence in your setups, and they need to be sophisticated and efficacious enough so that when you begin that setup, your partner or opponent is going to have moved to a favorable position for you to attack, and you attack. So when you do one, you've committed to the other. That's one principle that's very, very important. The second principle in many of these setups is that I want to sometimes, and particularly for this setup, begin the setup as well as lower my level simultaneously. It is a mistake when many wrestlers or martial artists begin a setup as step one, then lower their level as step two, and then begin their attack, their drop step, for example, to close the distance as step three. You want to combine at least a couple of those steps. So, for example, if I'm going to go with a forehead tap, I'm going to put my hand straight up. I don't want to put my hand up top so he can attack. I want to keep my hand kind of low. I want to tap him in the forehead. I want to cover his eyes slightly to distract him. But what's important is as I do that, I want to lower my level at the same time. So, as I said, I'm up here. I lower my level. I lower my level at the same time. Now I'm ready to attack. Hopefully I've distracted him. But I want to emphasize that the tap and the lower the level is at the same time. So that's step one and two is really two different sides of the coin for the same step. And I'm going to initiate my attack at that point. For example, if it was a double. Now, why it's important, I think, to lower your level at the same time you tap your opponent is if you wait, that opportunity will pretty much be gone in most instances. For example, if I tap Colby and I'm lowering my level, he's going to now be perceiving that I'm initiating an attack, and it's going to make it difficult for me to attack because he's going to increase the distance, put an arm down, do something to prevent my successfully initiating a good attack against him. So, tap, drop your level simultaneously. Next step is to begin the attack. And again, we'll be going over attacks more in future DVDs. I just want to get the first portion of it done. Now, you can adapt this to mixed martial arts. In wrestling, we're not allowed to be clubbing each other very hard. And so that's why we have like a forehead tap. But, of course, in mixed martial arts, where we might be up slightly higher, but again, I want us, while we're doing this whole series, to keep it at the root of wrestling, worry about being able to transition from your more stand-up type position later on. But remember, if you're not doing wrestling, if you're doing mixed martial arts, I can club the person pretty hard here. Not going to knock him out, but that's more likely to rattle his computer than just a simple wrestling style touch to the forehead. And so that's an alternative that you have, and that I would suggest if you're going to modify this to mixed martial arts. Just to come in and to pop them good, that is more likely to get a very favorable response for you to be able to attack your double leg, for example, or single. Again, we'll be going over different variations. I'm just showing the double as an example. The next setup we're going to use is the basic head pop. It's one of, again, the earlier setups that most wrestlers learn. I'm going to show you how I do this, and hopefully the way I do this will make sense in terms of improving your ability to attack your opponent. When I do a head pop, my goal is to get his head down, or at least traditionally, the goal is to get your opponent's head down so that when he pops up, after he's been distracted, that gives you an opening or an opportunity to attack. Say double leg, say single. I'm just showing double or discussing double as an example. Now, there's a couple reasons why just popping down, in my view, is not the greatest thing to do. One, if his weight is pretty much over where it should be, his center of gravity, basically chest, knee, ball of the foot aligned, if I push down, he's in pretty good shape there. He's got the ability to kind of defend against that fairly well from getting pulled down too much. Okay? If his weight was slightly forward, his head is going to go down much easier. Okay? So I want you to think a little bit about that as we go through this setup, at least the way I like to teach it and the way I like to do it. So when I do a head pop, one, just like the forehead tap, I'm going to lower my level at the same time. I do that for two reasons. One, as before, I save a step, I'm quicker, and therefore I'm more likely to be successful in my attack. For example, if I head pop and I drop down, that takes more time than to head pop and drop my level at the same time. Now, the second reason I drop my level at the same time is I want to use the weight of me dropping down to help pop him down. So that I'm not just using my arm strength, but I'm using my weight. Okay? If I can just maintain a solid frame here and pull down slightly, I've got a lot more power than if I'm just kind of using my arm here. The next thing that's important, and I want you to look at Colby's position here. If I just push his head down, even if I've got a good tug sagging on him, okay, which is, again, when I drop my level and I tug at the same time or head pop at the same time, I do put a lot more weight, and that makes it more difficult than if I just pop him with my arm. But I want you to notice this. If my goal is to get his head down, okay, to get a favorable shot, I can add to that and allow a little bit more time for myself to attack if I can get his weight slightly forward. So what I'm going to do, actually, when I do my head pop, I don't actually do a head pop, I do more of a head rake. I'm going to come down, but I'm also going to come laterally to me like this, because this is what I want to do to Colby. If I can whack his head forward, watch what happens. His head went down. I didn't have to push his head down to make it go down. I could bring his head down by moving laterally. Boom. Notice what else he did. He went forward. I broke his balance from a favorable defensive and offensive position from his to one where he had to recover. That's the point that will give me an opportunity to attack. So when I actually do this head pop, I like to actually even think of it more of as a head rake, although traditionally it's called more of a head pop. When I'm in here and I'm ready to do my attack, I'm going to pop this way, and then I'm going to come in. I'm not just going to pop down with my arm. I'm not even going to just pop down and sag. What I'm going to try to do as I lower my level is pull his head forward towards me. Notice his weight slightly goes forward. His head goes down. His weight goes forward. At the time he's recovering, that's when I'm attacking. I'm not waiting to evaluate that position. I know from doing that many times what my partner or opponent's response is going to be. So, just like before, when I've committed to pop him, I've also committed to attack. And even if I'm not successful in my attack, typically at worst, I'll bounce off him and we'll be neutral again. I really want to emphasize that point. When you do a setup, the setup and the attack, they're two sides of the same coin. When you do one, you've got to do the other most of the time and not simply evaluate the efficacy of your setup and then determine whether or not it's appropriate to attack. The opportunity will more times than not be lost. So, the head rake, I'm going to come in here. We're wrestling in here, maybe hand fighting. I'm going to pop this way, and then I'm going to come in. I'm going to pop forward, pop forward, pop forward. I'm going to lower my level, and then I'm going to attack. So. Another thing that's important, don't swipe at your opponent. That won't move his head. I've got to keep my hand rigid, and I kind of keep it kind of hooked. So my wrist is rigid, my hand is sort of cupped in. I want to rake him hard. I want to kind of think of clubbing him almost. It's not a, I'm not trying to like push it. I'm trying to pop it. And that's an important distinction. That will distract your opponent much more than if I'm simply trying like to do a gentle kind of a tug or something that's smooth. It needs to be an abrupt movement. When I whack him, I'm going to club his head, and that's going to get him forward just a little bit, and it's at that point where my opportunity to attack lies.